The man across the table didn't blink. He read from a page as if it were a grocery list. You are no longer authorized to operate any system within this company. Celia. 14 words. No eye contact, no hesitation. Just a cold sentence that ended 12 years of devotion in 49 seconds. They thought I'd leave quietly. What they didn't know was, those exact words triggered something I had buried deep in the system. Something they couldn't undo. But this unraveling didn't start in that room. It started a week earlier, with a glitch in Frankfurt that no one else noticed. But I couldn't ignore. It started with a blinking field in the Frankfurt logistics interface. Just one line of code failing to validate a route confirmation. To most, it would look like a hiccup. Harmless, routine. But to me, it felt off. I leaned in. The timestamp was wrong by 3 milliseconds. The protocol used to flag the handoff wasn't the one I'd designed, and the routing table had a strange duplication pattern. Something that wouldn't just happen. Someone had touched the architecture. I rerouted access and checked the system logs. The modification came from Singapore, not by accident, not by one of my team. It had been pushed through by a new admin credential I didn't recognize, a name I'd never seen before. I should have been furious, but what I felt was something colder, duller. A slow crawl of suspicion beneath my skin. My name is Celia Thornwell. I'm the principal systems architect behind Kestrel Dynamics International Operations. For 12 years, I've kept this company's 9-country supply chain breathing, optimizing routes, building disaster failovers, protecting vaccine deliveries during crises, even once rerouting PPE across oceans overnight. I'm not a face on a brochure. I'm the reason Kestrel runs on time. That system glitch? It wasn't just code to me. It was personal, because the engine they tried to alter. Its name flashed quietly in the console. Centra.os. No one at Kestrel knows what that name means. They've never asked. But it was my sister's name, Centra. She died when I was 24. A shipping delay in our rural hospital meant her medication arrived too late. That moment didn't just break me. It forged me. I built the Centra system to make sure no family, in any country, would ever wait in the dark like I did. So when I saw that line of code, my code, being altered by someone with new clearance, something clenched in me. I pulled up the authorization logs. The update had been approved, but not by me. Someone in leadership had quietly rerouted system control, and if they were confident enough to overwrite me, that meant something was already in motion. I sat back in my chair, breathing slow. It wasn't the glitch that scared me. It was the fact that someone thought I wouldn't notice. I didn't have to wait long to find out who had the authority to overwrite me. His name was Bryant Lister. The first time I saw him, he was standing in front of the entire operations team on the 18th floor. Gray shirt, no tie, sleeves perfectly creased. He didn't smile, didn't ask for introductions. Just launched into a presentation with a title that said everything about him. Efficiency before legacy. His voice was calm, but mechanical, like someone who'd practiced every word. He didn't talk about people. He talked about margins, redundancies, and output ratios. About turning Kestrel into a scalable, investor-forward enterprise. Not once did he mention the system that held all of it together. Not once did he look at me. I watched his fingers flick through slides that reduced entire departments to bullet points. There was no warmth, no curiosity, only precision. It was the kind of man who didn't believe in asking how something worked, only how fast it could be replaced. 2 days later, I was called into his office. His assistant said he wanted a quick strategic sync. I walked in expecting small talk, maybe a tour of the system's new reporting dashboard. Instead, he looked up from his laptop and asked, without preamble, "What would it take to rebuild what you built? Without you?" I froze, not outwardly, but internally. My mind ran a loop in less than a second. Did he not realize what he'd just said? Or worse, Did he? I kept my voice even. That depends on what you're trying to build. He gave a small shrug. Just theoretical. If we ever want to restructure, move parts offshore, or make the platform more investor transparent. I nodded slowly. You'd need more than a new framework. You'd need context. You'd need alignment. He didn't seem interested in any of that. He just said, "Noted," and returned to his screen. As I walked out of his office, a slow dread coiled in my chest. It wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't ask. Not once did he inquire what problems the system solved. Not once did he acknowledge what it cost to build. It was clear. He didn't want to understand it. He wanted to control it. Later that afternoon, I tried to shake the feeling. I went back to my team, ran updates, checked access logs. That's when I noticed it. 3 new administrator names had been added to the core directory, each with level 4 modification rights. One of them had pushed the Singapore patch. Those were rights only I had. Until now. Even the air in the building felt different. I passed 2 junior engineers in the hallway, and they gave me a tight, polite nod. But their eyes dropped quickly. Whispers moved faster than emails in companies like this. People sensed changes before they were announced. By 7 that evening, the halls were nearly empty. I stayed late to finish performance reports, trying to ignore the weight pressing against my chest. On my way out, I passed by the shared printer near HR. It was still humming. Someone had forgotten to collect a stack of documents. I glanced at the top page. Q4 restructuring candidates. Confidential draft. My name wasn't what I was looking for, but it was what I saw first. Thornwell, Celia A. First on the list, marked in red. I didn't need to read the justification line, but I did anyway. Legacy architect, high salary, proprietary skill set, risk factor if removed abruptly. And beside it, a tag, red flagged for priority exit. I stood there in the dim light, the soft whir of the printer filling the silence. For 12 years, I had given them everything, my nights, my flights, my fingerprints in every line of logic that kept this company alive across 9 countries. Now, I was a bullet point, a calculation. I left the page exactly where I found it, walked past the elevator, took the stairs, outside. The sky had cracked open with a cold drizzle. I stopped under the awning and looked up at the glass-paneled building where Sentra still pulsed quietly in the back end, still running, still steady, still mine. They thought they were replacing a part. They had no idea they were tugging at the foundation. And the foundation remembers. The list confirmed what I already knew. But I wasn't just worried about being cut loose. I was worried about what they might break while doing it. Early the next morning, I unlocked my office before sunrise. The halls were still dark, the hum of the servers barely audible through the walls. I didn't turn on the lights. Some part of me wanted to remain unseen, even by the system I had once designed to notice everything. I slipped into the terminal console and dove deep, past the daily metrics, beneath the interface dashboards, and into the logic architecture that only I had mapped in full. My fingers moved on muscle memory, bypassing layers I had locked down years ago. These were the root branches, the heartbeat of Sentra. Something had changed. Lines of logic that were once immutable now showed signs of tampering. Not deletion, no. That would have raised alarms, but subtle modifications. A function here redefined. A sequence delayed by milliseconds. A new override script nested between 2 core verification steps. And then, there it was. A rewritten clause that bypassed the emergency override failsafe for Frankfurt's transit node. It was delicate, almost elegant, but it wasn't mine. Someone was trying to clean around the edges of a bomb without realizing it was live. I sat back for a moment, my chest tight. I wasn't angry. I was alert, because I knew what this meant. They weren't just replacing me. They were tampering with a system they didn't understand. back in 2017, after a major cyber attack hit our industry. Our CEO at the time, Thomas Marin, called me into his office. He'd just read about a pharmaceutical logistics firm that lost millions in refrigerated vaccines because their central routing system had been hijacked. "Can you build something?" he asked me. "That shuts us down before someone else can?" It wasn't just a theoretical challenge. It was a directive, a trust. And so, I wrote a single-line kill switch buried beneath 6 security layers. A quiet line of logic designed never to be seen unless you were looking for it. It didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a sentence someone might say on a bad day. "You are no longer authorized to operate any system within this company. Celia." 14 words. If spoken by an executive, with the right vocal cadence, it would be detected by the system's natural language input sensors. A confirmation check would fire, awaiting biometric override from me within 90 minutes. If it didn't receive it, it would initiate a global soft shutdown, sequential, country by country, like dominoes. I never thought I'd need it, but I wasn't naive enough to think it couldn't happen. And now, the logic string surrounding that phrase had been flagged for review by a user I didn't recognize. I checked the system credentials. The tag read, "Blister Admin." My gut twisted, not just because it was a sloppy alias. It was him, Bryant Lister. I ran a quick cross-check on his employment history. Before Kestrel, he'd been at Veriquo, a smaller logistics tech firm that suffered a massive network outage 5 years ago. I remembered the incident clearly. In fact, I had been the one they brought in to consult on recovery. I'd traced the fault back to a single architectural flaw, an insecure authentication module installed under pressure from an ambitious young VP. The name hadn't meant much to me then, but now, with fresh eyes, I remembered. That VP had been Bryant Lister. He had tried to bury his mistake beneath a mountain of misdirection and PR spin. I had quietly corrected it, and now, he was trying to dismantle my system. I stared at the screen, the glow casting hard shadows across my hands. They were steady, but my breath had shortened. Not from fear, from certainty. This wasn't about efficiency. This was personal. I backed up the current build and saved a copy of the untouched 2019 architecture onto an external drive. Before logging out, I opened the Dev Notes module, one only I had access to, and left a quiet entry. "They're not just changing code, they're rewriting memory." I leaned back in my chair and opened the system's map. Singapore, Frankfurt, Nairobi, all lit faintly with a soft flicker, not red, not yet, but active. It hadn't collapsed, not yet, but they had pulled the first thread, and I was the only one left who remembered where it led. They weren't just rewriting my code, they were rewriting the story I spent 12 years building. And stories, unlike systems, don't shut down quietly. I met with Alan Berger, my longtime legal advisor, in a quiet cafe tucked between 2 shuttered bookstores, one of those places where time moved slower. And words mattered more. He'd been with me since the very beginning, back when I was still consulting out of my apartment. Running Centra on nothing but caffeine and grief. I slid my laptop across the table and showed him the original build, the earliest lines of logic for the Centra OS. Time-stamped 3 weeks before I officially joined Kestrel, the biometric failsafe, the logic ladders, the core optimization routing, they were all mine. Pre-employment, unambiguous. He studied the code like a man reading a will. "This is yours, Celia," he said, finally. "Legally. If they attempt to repackage or sell this segment without your consent, you have grounds." The words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Because I hadn't built Centra to keep. I built it to give. To the company. To the world. To the people counting on their insulin arriving on time. Their supplies making it through customs. Their lives depending on milliseconds of precision. And now, I had to prove I still deserved to keep what I never asked to own. That's what hurt the most. Back at the office. I barely had time to log in before Bryant called me up. No warning, no subject line, just a terse email. Drop by my office before noon. His office was pristine, sterile. There was no trace of paper, no photos, not even a screensaver. He didn't invite me to sit, just slid a cream envelope across his desk. "This is a disengagement package," he said plainly. "Nothing dramatic, no burn bridges. We appreciate your work. Celia. But the board's shifting priorities. We're going lean." I opened the envelope. A 2-page agreement, couched in legal niceties and corporate platitudes. A severance amount that barely covered 3 months of rent. In exchange, I'd hand over all documentation, remain silent about any internal systems, and agree not to consult for competing firms for 2 years. I looked up. "You're calling this clean?" He gave a thin smile. "It's market standard. Consider it an elegant close." An elegant close for 12 years of my life. I didn't argue, didn't throw the envelope. I just nodded, tucked it into my folder, and walked out. But the moment the elevator doors closed, my throat tightened. Not from shock, from recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated erasure. And the erasure had already begun. That night. At home. I poured a glass of wine I didn't touch and stared at the cream envelope for nearly an hour. Then I opened my laptop, more from instinct than intention. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. An email. No subject. No sender name. Just a system address from Kestrel's internal network. The body contained only one line. "They're gutting your system for a fast IPO push. Ask about Singapore." I froze. Gutting. Not revising. Not optimizing. Gutting. I opened the logs. There it was. Lines of code recently marked for removal. Layers of redundancy. Conflict mitigation logic. Real-time rerouting tools. All flagged as non-essential architecture. Those were the pieces that protected the system from collapse. The exact tools that kept a logistics chain running when weather hit. When politics changed. When borders closed. And now. They were cutting them out for one reason: to make the system look leaner, more scalable, more profitable. Singapore had already had 2 outages that week. They weren't reporting them, they were hiding them, and in doing so, they were rewriting my system, not to improve it, but to sell it. I closed the logs and reached for the envelope again. For a second, I thought about signing it, walking away, starting fresh. But then I thought about that little girl in Jakarta, whose cancer treatment had arrived 1 hour late until Centra rerouted through a storm. About the old man in Morocco, whose heart meds had reached him just in time because the system rerouted mid-flight. You don't amputate the brain of a system and expect it to survive. And you don't silence the person who remembers how to keep it breathing. I slid the envelope into the drawer, unopened, unsigned, and opened a blank file instead. The title read, "If they push, I pull." I didn't respond to the exit offer. I didn't make noise. I simply went quiet. And in this company, silence was often mistaken for surrender. But I wasn't surrendering. I was preserving. That night, just past 9 o'clock, the office was mostly dark. The only lights still glowing came from the emergency signs and the faint pulse of the server room. It was the same hum I used to find comforting, the sound of a living system, one I had built line by line. Now, it sounded like a dying heart. I logged in using my master credentials, still active, for now. If Bryant's team had started the process of revoking my access, they hadn't finished yet, a mistake, one I intended to use. From my bag, I pulled a cold-forged external drive, a private, encrypted backup tool I kept for disaster scenarios. In theory, I should have never needed it. But these days, disaster didn't wear the face of war or weather. It wore a crisp gray suit and smiled while offering you an exit clause. I opened the terminal and accessed the last stable build of Centra, Centra.os, stable.2019.org, the final untouched version before they began pruning it for IPO optics. I began copying. It was like watching my own heartbeat load file by file, folder by folder, routing protocols, emergency delivery logic, multi-region verification tools. The layers were dense, heavy, precise. Every line had a story behind it. Some I'd written at 3 a.m. with coffee-stained fingers, some after a funeral, some after a child's medicine arrived in time because my code made the impossible happen. And when the system prompted me to document each module for archival, I did, carefully, thoroughly, until I reached the domino clause. That part. I left blank. No description, no code snippet, just a silent omission. One only I would notice. The system blinked a warning. Incomplete documentation detected. Proceed anyway? I clicked. Yes. You don't teach people how to dismantle a weapon while it's still aimed at something worth protecting. As the backup reached 93%, a pop-up flickered onto my screen, not from the local system, but from a secure comms tool buried deep in the network, something I'd helped design years ago but hadn't used since. Secure Channel Request, R. Calderon, my breath caught. Renee Calderon had been one of the sharpest IT consultants Kestrel ever had. Before he left quietly 3 years ago, long before Bryant arrived, we hadn't spoken since. One message appeared. Your biometric trigger is still active across all nodes. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed, confirmed? His response came instantly. Tested from Singapore node this morning, still pinging your signature. I closed my eyes. They hadn't disabled me. They couldn't, because the root-level authentication I had built, my failsafe, still recognized me as the only override key. They'd wiped layers, renamed files, restructured flows, but they'd missed the trigger. 14 words, spoken with precision, and only I could cancel what would follow. I unplugged the drive, heart pounding under layers of numbness, not from fear, from restraint. The kind of quiet rage that didn't explode, but compressed itself into purpose. I knew what they were doing. I'd seen the signs. The IPO numbers had to look lean. Bryant needed a system that could appear scalable, look efficient, sell well, but he was cutting the structural integrity to get there. And if it all failed, I'd be the name on the error report. Still, I didn't lash out. I didn't write an email. I did the one thing I knew how to do better than anyone in that building. I finished the job. As I shut everything down, I left one hidden entry in the system logs, a note only a person with root access could ever read. If they want to break it, fine, but they'll break it with me still inside. Then I stepped out into the hallway. The office behind me, silent as stone. No one saw me leave. No one asked where I'd been. But the system knew, and it remembered who had last touched the heart of it. I thought the worst damage would be internal, efficiency lost, code corrupted, egos inflated. But then, I saw a name in a flagged report. David Kamau, age 24, junior systems engineer in Nairobi. And just like that, the consequences weren't theoretical anymore. The report came from a private back channel, a thread among a few former Kestrel engineers still watching from the sidelines. A shipment of pediatric vaccines bound for 3 rural hospitals in Kilifi County had been delayed 26 hours. Temperatures had fluctuated. Protocols had failed. 3 clinics had to cancel appointments. 1 child's treatment window was lost. The official explanation? Configuration error, Nairobi node. David was listed as the operator on shift. His ID tagged red in the system. And I knew instantly it wasn't him. I pulled up Nairobi's recent logs. It took me 10 minutes to find the issue. A command override from the Singapore node had reprioritized bandwidth allocations, interrupting Nairobi's emergency routing queue. The update hadn't been cleared with local teams. It was sloppy, and above David's level. He'd just been the one standing there when it broke. I booked a flight that night. No one asked me to. No one even knew I was going. I used my own money, my old credentials, and an outdated company badge tucked in my wallet like a relic. The airport was half empty at midnight, and the gate agent barely glanced at my ID. On the plane, I stared out at the dark curve of the earth beneath me. I thought about the promise I made to myself when I wrote the very first version of Sentra. This system will not fail people. That had been the point. That had always been the point. 12 years ago, when I first met David, he was a wiry intern, barely tall enough to see over the console banks. I remembered him asking, wide-eyed, "What's it like building something that saves lives?" I had laughed. "Ask me when it still works without me." When I stepped into the Nairobi office the next morning, he looked stunned. "Ms. Thornwell?" he stammered. "You're not." "I know," I said. "I'm not supposed to be here." And then, softer, "But I needed to be." He handed me his logs. Shoulders slumped, lips tight. "They think it's my fault." I nodded and said nothing, because in that moment, it didn't matter what they thought. It mattered what the data said. And the data cleared him. By noon, I had traced the failure to a faulty sync script pushed by a strategic optimization subteam, a euphemism for people who didn't know what they were breaking. I patched the loop, restarted the queue, drafted the internal report myself. I handed it to David. "Put your name on it, not mine." His eyes widened. "You fixed it." "You were never the problem," I replied. That evening, I visited one of the clinics. A nurse there, exhausted and tight-lipped, told me they'd been on the verge of rerouting their cold chain supply through a manual vendor. "We almost gave up," she whispered. "Then the trucks arrived." I didn't explain who I was. I just smiled, nodded, and left. The next day, I caught the first flight home. No headlines, no announcement, no thanks. The Nairobi team didn't mention me in their report. Kestrel's execs never asked where the patch came from. The logs just showed queue restored, impact contained. And that was enough. Because I didn't want credit. I didn't want a seat at the table anymore. I just wanted Sentra to do what it was meant to do. Protect people, especially the ones no one saw. On the flight back to New York, I opened my laptop to check node stability. Nairobi was back in green, but a new message blinked in the corner of the screen. A direct ping from Frankfurt. "Singapore dashboard just dropped offline. You seeing this?" I stared at the screen. The cabin lights dim above me. One thread had frayed. Now another was unraveling, and I was starting to see the shape of the whole thing coming undone. One thread had frayed. Now another was unraveling. I wasn't watching a system fail. I was watching it rot from the inside. It was time to stop reacting and start preparing. Back in New York, I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked 2 extra blocks in the rain, past the main entrance of Kestrel Dynamics, and around to the side utility door, the one that still accepted legacy credentials. I scanned my old badge. The light blinked yellow, then green. The door clicked open. I moved through the halls like a shadow. I wasn't trespassing yet. My access hadn't been officially revoked, likely an oversight by the efficiency ops team. The building felt hollow, polished, detached from the systems pulsing beneath it. I headed downstairs, to sub-level 2, the old data engineering lab. It hadn't been used in years, not since we migrated to cloud-integrated control hubs. But the terminals still worked, and more importantly, they still trusted me. I sat down and opened a shell window. The system recognized my biometric input within seconds. From there, I began what I'd known. Deep down, I'd eventually have to do, write a new defense layer, something separate from the original failsafe, something even leaner and quieter. I called it Watch Layer. Unlike the original kill switch, Watch Layer wasn't designed to shut things down. It was built to listen, to monitor, to detect the invisible thread of human error masquerading as progress. I programmed it to detect certain behaviors: simultaneous node overwrites, unauthorized logic stream rewrites, mass deletions of error reporting functions. But most critically, I gave it one trigger: 14 words. If anyone in the system, from any location, spoke those exact words out loud, WatchLayer would escalate immediately, not to alert, not to notify, to act. As the code compiled and synced to the passive memory layer, I stared at the command line. No fanfare, no lights, just one line: listening. True. No one would even know it was there. They'd made it look like I was walking away, but I was anchoring myself deeper than ever. I leaned back in the chair, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd be able to walk away for real, let them burn what they didn't understand, and watch it collapse on their own. But then I opened the diagnostic feed out of habit, and everything in my chest went still. Singapore, Frankfurt, São Paulo. 3 nodes showing minor but rising packet delays. I drilled down. An unverified update had been pushed by the new Efficiency Ops team, intended to streamline multi-region dispatch load balancing, but they hadn't validated the time sync protocols between nodes. The result? A creeping misalignment of core data timestamps. Not a bug. Not yet. But a fork in the wire. If one more update like that went through without correction, the logic tree that governed synchronized dispatch could start contradicting itself. Each node would think the others had failed. Emergency reroutes would loop. Backups would pile. Eventually, they'd all crash. From within. A domino chain. Already primed. Already tilting. And no one had noticed. I didn't patch it. Didn't send a warning. Didn't reach out to anyone. Instead, I created a log file, encrypted it, and sent it to one address: r.calderon.secure@protonmail.com. Renee's off-grid channel. The subject line read, "In case I disappear." Then I added one final line to WatchLayer's log: "They've started pulling the wrong wire. The next one will snap." I shut down the terminal. My breath felt shallow. The silence was thicker than before. I left the building the same way I came. Quietly. Unseen. No alarms. No one asking questions. At home. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the city beyond my window. My laptop sat closed on the table. My fingers hovered above it for a moment. Then I opened the monitor. One black window. One blinking cursor. One status line. Awaiting verbal trigger. And somewhere deep inside the system, WatchLayer waited with me. The system was listening. And then, so was Bryant. At 8:01 a.m., an internal ping hit my inbox with no subject line, no explanation. Meeting with COO, immediate. No calendar invite, no context, just a directive. I knew what it was. I had known since the moment I deployed WatchLayer. This was the execution. I arrived at the 21st floor in silence. The hallway smelled like fresh paint and toner. The conference room door was already ajar. The lights inside fluorescent and unforgiving. There were no greetings, no pleasantries, just Bryant Lister sitting at the far end of the table, and a quiet security officer posted by the glass wall. No HR rep, no witness, no buffer. I didn't sit. Bryant didn't invite me to. He didn't open a folder, didn't clear his throat. He just spoke. "You are no longer authorized to operate any system within this company. Celia." 14 words, spoken with all the ceremony of reading out a weather forecast. My breath didn't hitch. My heart didn't race. But something deep in my spine pulsed, a thread pulling tight, then releasing. He had said it. They had said it. Not me. Them. I looked at him. Not through him. Not around him. At him. He didn't blink. Didn't know what he'd done. Didn't feel the tremor moving through the wires beneath us. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. No plea. No protest. This wasn't a meeting. It was a switch being flipped. I turned, walked to the door. My shoes were silent on the tile. As I stepped into the hallway, I passed the corner security camera, mounted just above the exit sign. A small green LED blinked softly. Recording. Live. That room. That phrase. That moment. Captured in perfect clarity. They hadn't just fired me. They'd triggered the system, and the system remembered. Downstairs. I stepped into the elevator. Alone. It began its quiet descent. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't check it immediately. I already knew. When I reached the lobby, I pulled the screen up. A single notification. Watch layer status. Verbal trigger confirmed. Sequence initiated. Node 19. Singapore. Sync instability detected. Node 29. Frankfurt. Redundant protocol loop. Node 39. São Paulo. Dispatch delay escalating. I stared at the data without feeling. They'd cut the wire. They just hadn't realized the charge was live. I stepped outside into the cold. Crisp morning. A slight wind moved down Lexington Avenue, carrying the scent of coffee and ambition. People bustled past me, phones to ears, briefcases in hand, lives moving on, as if the backbone of 9 nations hadn't just begun to collapse beneath their feet. Back in the building, the clock on the meeting room wall was still ticking, the cameras were still recording, but the system, the one they never understood, was now responding. Not to revenge, to logic, to protection protocols they had ignored, overwritten, underestimated, and all it had taken was 49 seconds. From the time I stepped into that room to the moment they destroyed themselves, not with malice, but with ignorance, and with 14 words. There was no explosion, no sirens, no alarms, just silence, the kind that settles in the bones after something irreversible has begun. I didn't go far, just 3 blocks from Kestrel headquarters. I slipped into the cafe where I used to write code on weekends. The baristas didn't recognize me anymore. That was fine. I wasn't here to be remembered. The table by the window was empty, like it had been waiting. I slid into the booth, folded my coat beside me, and stared at the blank surface of my closed laptop. The machine had no access now. My credentials had been wiped sometime after I left the building. No ports, no nodes, no live feeds. The system no longer knew my name. And yet, my name was everywhere in it. I wrapped my hands around the mug of black coffee in front of me and listened to the low hum of the espresso machine. The clink of ceramic cups. The ordinary world carried on. A woman scrolled through her phone beside the pastry case. A man in a gray suit yawned between sips of tea. No one noticed that Singapore had just gone dark. My phone buzzed. I ignored it at first. Then another, and another. I finally pulled it out. 5 notifications blinked across the lock screen. Singapore, central dashboard offline. Dubai, dispatch command loop error. Frankfurt, UI black, fallback systems unresponsive. Is this you? T. Verma. Are you seeing this? G. Isaac. I didn't answer. I had nothing to say, not now. I stared at the notifications, then turned the phone face down. The truth was already in motion. WatchLayer had done exactly what I built it to do. Observe, wait, respond. I hadn't pushed it, they had. Across 9 countries. Systems were beginning to blink, stutter, and misalign. Not all at once, not yet. But the signals were spreading, like hairline fractures across ice. And I just sat there, in my corner booth, the quiet epicenter of a storm that no one on the street could yet see. Didn't you used to work at Kestrel? The voice came from the counter. One of the baristas. Young, curious, not unkind. I gave a tired smile. A long time ago. He nodded, already distracted by another order. He didn't know that the systems delivering his store's inventory had just lost time sync across 3 major continents. No one knew, not yet. But I did, and I was the only one sitting alone with it. This wasn't triumph. This wasn't revenge. This was a slow collapse I had tried to prevent, being carried out by the very people who once asked me to protect them. The coffee had gone cold. I didn't notice until I took a sip and set it down with a quiet clink. The mug left a perfect circle of condensation on the table. I opened my laptop. It didn't respond. No access, no interface, no connection, only me. Then a single new email arrived. No subject line, sent from a private internal address I hadn't seen in years. From Nairobi Operations at Kestrel.com, subject. The message read, "We know what you did. We want in." This wasn't sabotage. This was defense. If you're building something new, don't do it alone. We remember. The Nairobi team. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't move. They knew, not all of it, but enough. And somewhere in the wreckage, someone else had chosen not just to understand, but to stand with me. I didn't reply. Not yet. I marked the message unread, closed the laptop, and looked back out at the street, where the world still moved. Unaware. Even silence echoes, and mine had finally reached someone who remembered. I didn't respond to the email from Nairobi, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't have to. The system was already speaking for me. By the next morning, the calls began. The first came from a blocked number. No voicemail, just a long, cold silence on the other end. I didn't pick up. The second came from Bryant. He left a message this time, voice tight with forced calm, like someone holding back panic behind a polished suit of composure. "Celia, we need to speak. Urgently. There are discrepancies. I think we need your insight." I let it sit. The third came from Kestrel's legal department, asking for urgent clarification on modules that were now inaccessible due to what they called unexpected credential failures. They wanted a statement, a timestamp, something they could use to assign blame or beg for help. Then came the CEO. He didn't even try to mask it. "Celia, we're experiencing full instability across all logistics platforms. Please, if you're seeing this, can you call or advise or at least talk to us?" I read it twice, not because I needed to, but because I was still deciding what part of me felt anything at all. Anger? No, that ship had sailed. Pride? Not really. Satisfaction? Maybe. But even that felt hollow. What I felt was distance, a kind of stillness, like the eye of a storm had settled over me while the world outside screamed. I opened my email client and typed one line. No greeting, no signature, no explanation. "Protocol activated. System integrity compromised. Contact architect." That was it. I hit send, closed the laptop, and took another sip of my now cold coffee. They wanted control. They took it. They severed ties, signed off on deletions, redlined my name off documents I authored. Now they were beginning to understand what that meant. I imagined the boardroom, Bryant leaning over someone's shoulder, legal team barking into phones, junior engineers scrambling to hard reset nodes that weren't responding. And then someone, maybe the intern, maybe a senior tech, would notice the screen flicker. Authentication required. Primary architect biometric confirmation. Override. Not available. Attempt 1 of 1. Used. Locked. It must have hit them like a wall of ice. There was no back door. There was no override. And no one, not a single person, could replicate my access. Because back in 2017, the old CEO had asked me one question. What would it take to keep this system safe from theft? And I answered with code. Code that recognized only one set of biometric triggers. Mine. Retina. Pulse. Subdermal pressure profile. The trifecta no one could fake. And once they erased me, the system no longer knew who to listen to. Another call came through. This one from the CEO himself. I let it ring twice, then I answered. Celia? He said quickly. We've lost Frankfurt. Singapore's dashboard is frozen. Dubai's fallback is looping itself into chaos. No one can get in. I know, I said. Is there a way to stop it? I paused. Let the silence stretch. Not without root confirmation, I said flatly, which you erased. A beat of silence. Then, softly, is there anything we can do? I took a breath. Then said the one thing they didn't want to hear. You can wait. He cleared his throat. What do you want? That made me pause. For a long time. Finally, I replied, voice cool and quiet. You wanted control. Now you have it. So does the chaos. I hung up. Outside, the sky was gray and heavy, like it knew something was breaking apart above the clouds. I gathered my things and stepped into the cold air. On my phone, the node tracker showed 6 of 9 countries now flagged as unstable. Each carried the same final line. Override required. Architect biometric signature, no match found. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not from vengeance, but from knowing they finally understood the cost of forgetting the builder of the house, while they were still living inside it. By the time I got home, the headlines were already crawling across the bottom of my screen. Kestrel Global, $470 million, loss after worldwide shutdown. 9 countries affected in multi-day logistics crash. Critical systems offline for 72 hours. They hadn't attached my name yet, but I knew it was coming. Then came the segment I wasn't ready for. Nairobi. A reporter standing beside a supply truck, speaking through tense breath. The vaccine shipment to Kiambu County was delayed 48 hours due to unresolved system outages. Several health centers have exhausted their backup stock. I stopped mid-sip. My mug rattled slightly against the counter. I hadn't touched the system in days. I thought I'd done enough by staying out of it. I thought the chaos would be confined to corporate servers and quarterly earnings reports. But this was people. Real lives. And suddenly, silence didn't feel powerful anymore. It felt cruel. I opened my laptop for the first time in 3 days. The familiar interface greeted me like an old friend who never blamed, never asked questions, just waited. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, then typed in the 14-word passphrase. The system, still dormant across nodes, recognized the biometric trigger. The same phrase that locked it was now, by design, the key to reopen. But I didn't send it through corporate channels. No boardrooms, no lawyers, no conditions. Instead, I sent it directly to 9 people, 1 for each country, senior engineers I had trained, trusted, and protected long before the IPO vultures took over. Along with the code, I wrote one line. No conditions, no contracts, just fix what they broke. The message was delivered. I closed the laptop and waited. It started with Singapore. The dashboard lit up like a defibrillator had jolted it back to life. Then Frankfurt came online. Then Dubai. Then Nairobi. An hour later, I got a message. Vaccine trucks resumed. First batch delivered. No fatalities. Thank you. I didn't realize I was crying until I saw the water on the glass I was holding. Not because I had won anything, but because something had been saved. Something still mattered. I sat back and watched as the news coverage shifted tone. The disaster had passed, but now the story had teeth. A whistleblower leak. Internal emails. A memo timestamped 2 months ago surfaced on an independent journalist's blog. Once we mirror the core logic, we can offboard Celia before IPO filing. Huge savings. The journalist didn't hold back. Kestrel Global deliberately removed the architect of their operating system to maximize IPO margins. The story exploded. Reddit threads, Twitter storms, industry veterans weighing in with disgust. Built by her IPO at what cost, we remember. Celia, I didn't post. I didn't retweet. I just sat there, listening to the roar of a world that had finally put the pieces together. Then came the image I hadn't expected. The CEO of Kestrel, once smug, calculated, impenetrable, standing at a press conference, head slightly bowed. I deeply regret the misjudgments made by our leadership. We underestimated the systems, and we underestimated the woman who built them. I turned off the TV. The air outside was cold, but clean. I stepped onto the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, breathing deep for the first time in weeks, back inside. My desk light glowed softly. On it, blueprints for a new platform sat open, an ethical architecture. Decentralized, inclusive, a fresh start. The kind built not for investors, but for people. One tab on my screen blinked. A new message from Nairobi. Celia, we're building something. This time, it's ours. Will you join us? I didn't hesitate. I smiled. And I typed the only word that mattered now. Yes. The sunrise over Zurich poured golden light across my new office. Clean glass, quiet air, and a single line of code blinking gently on the monitor. I was no longer part of Kestrel. I was Centra Systems now, a name born not from a branding team, but from memory, from love. My sister's name, Centra, was the reason I ever entered logistics. She had died waiting for a medication that arrived 48 hours too late. Now. Our company's motto sat etched beneath the logo on the far wall: Global Safety, Human First. I glanced down at the envelope resting beside my keyboard. No return address. Inside, a single sheet, signed by Marcus, the former CEO of Kestrel. You were always the real brain. I just wish we'd seen it sooner. There was no apology, but it didn't matter. Recognition, at this point, was a whisper compared to the roar I had already heard from around the world. I turned back to the screen. One prompt waited for activation. Initialize watch layer? Fingers hovering. I typed the same 14-word phrase they once used to fire me. Only this time, it wasn't a trigger for collapse. It was the spark for rebirth. The system blinked alive. A secure, ethical logistics network stretched its reach to 9 pilot countries. This time, no IPO rush, no oversight shortcuts, just pure intention. Human-centered safety and full transparency. A soft ping interrupted the quiet. 3 faces appeared on my screen. Executives from companies that had once been Kestrel's fiercest rivals. Now, they were partners in our shared alliance. I held veto power across the board, not out of ego, out of trust. One of them leaned in. We don't just want your system, Celia. We want your standards. I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because something better had begun. Outside my office window, the team I had helped assemble, diverse, brilliant, still learning, buzzed with energy. Some of them hadn't even been born when I wrote my first line of code. And still, here we were, building something not for profit, but for people. Sometimes, the system has to break so that something better can rise. If Celia's story moved you, let us know in the comments. Share this video with someone who's ever been underestimated, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories like hers deserve to be remembered and retold.